Since the turn of the century, the Supreme Court has rapidly become more polarized. And in 2022, justices voted along ideological lines in 21% of cases. During this period of polarization, the court has made landmark decisions that have changed the landscape of American life, most notably the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And since then, polling shows that only 25% of Americans have a great deal of trust in the court, and 62% of Americans believe that women should have access to an abortion.
Actually, there may be some positive results from the Supreme Court losing a little bit of its luster and giving back a little bit of authority to the people to think more deeply about our own rights.
Have decades of bitter political fighting built a polarized Supreme Court that is out of step with Americans? And where does the court go from here? There's an irony to the Supreme Court. Justices are not politicians. They are not elected, and they don't write laws. But they are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. Politicians are aware that how they vote on Supreme Court nominees matters to voters. The justices may not be political, but the process of being chosen is.
I think that the story of how we got this current Supreme Court is very interesting. It really begins, in a way, with the decision in Roe and the backlash against that decision in favor of women's right to choose an abortion.
After Roe was decided in 1973, conservatives spent decades methodically working to transform the judiciary.
In the aftermath of that decision, a lot of conservative thinkers were trying to figure out what kind of constitutional strategy would work to overturn the decision in Roe and other rights protective decisions that had emerged from the Warren Court and afterwards.
But the Supreme Court's power isn't explicitly written into the Constitution, and was once considered the weakest branch of the federal government. That changed in 1803, when the landmark decision in Marbury v. Madison gave the Supreme Court sole authority to decide the meaning of the Constitution and interpret the laws passed by Congress.
The Supreme Court, over the course of American history, has dramatically expanded the scope of freedom, the protection of equality.
As an institution, it has built up regard over the centuries and has built up the power to command authority and to get the political branches to follow its decisions. But in a large respect, that power depends on its acceptance by the American people. If the American people don't accept the judgments of the Supreme Court, it will lose the power that it has.
After becoming Chief Justice in 1953, Earl Warren, a liberal icon, presided over landmark rulings expanding civil rights. Brown v. Board of Education desegregated schools. Loving v. Virginia protected interracial marriage. Griswold v. Connecticut guarded access to contraception. And Miranda v. Arizona ensured people are informed of their rights before interrogation.
Conservatives reacted strongly against the liberalism of the Warren Court.
The Warren era gave rise to the Federalist Society, a movement of conservative legal scholars founded in 1982, and the legal theory known as originalism, the idea that the Constitution should be understood as it was meant at the time it was written.
Our approach does not view the Constitution as some kind of what you might call a super-municipal code, designed to address merely the problems of a particular era.
I believe that originalism was developed as an approach to constitutional tradition, as a way of opposing Warren Court decisions.
You have a number of really important society-changing opinions that come from the Supreme Court in those years, and the Federalist Society is really a response to that and a desire to really change the understanding of the Constitution in response to many of those decisions.
Fidelity to the text of the document that contains all these assurances of our public happiness, the Constitution of the United States.
The Federalist Society emerged as the home of originalism, exerting influence on the selection and confirmation of judges across the judiciary. Over the last 40 years, arguably no group has had a greater imprint on the federal courts, including the Supreme Court.
Originalism, surprisingly, became a kind of powerful social movement.
Critics say Democrats let the movement go largely unanswered, failing to champion a counterweight to originalism.
A lot of people who grew up during the Warren Court era or afterwards sort of assumed that the courts were a place where Democrats would win or would have a friendly audience.
I think that conservatives have done a much better job of organizing around the Supreme Court and a much better job of looking to fill vacancies on the federal courts with those who are very conservative.
Conservatives hold a 6-3 supermajority on the court, thanks in large part to strategy and good luck.
Today I am nominating Chief Judge Merrick Brian Garland to join the Supreme Court.
In 2016, Senate Republicans refused to hold nomination hearings for Merrick Garland, who former President Obama nominated to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia, with almost a year left in office.
As I've said repeatedly, the next president will be filling that vacancy, and we'll have to see who that is.
The blockade allowed Obama's successor, Donald Trump, to appoint conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch. And 2 years later, Trump elevated a second pick, conservative Brett Kavanaugh. The sudden death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in 2020, weeks before the election, gave Trump a rare third nomination. Republicans rushed through Justice Amy Coney Barrett days before the presidential election.
I think that McConnell's blockade of Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland was a strong signal that Republican control of the Senate is going to mean Democratic presidents cannot get any Supreme Court justice confirmed, not just in the last year of a presidency, but very likely for the entirety of a presidency.
I expect in our toxic, politically polarized times, if the president and the majority of the Senate are different political parties, the Senate simply won't confirm presidential nominees for the Supreme Court.
The court is young. 8 of 9 justices were confirmed since 2005. The oldest justice is Clarence Thomas, who's 74. With the court's balance of power unlikely to change soon, progressives have called for an overhaul, expanding membership of the court and imposing term limits.
There's no magic number of 9 for the Supreme Court justices. It didn't start out as 9. The framers actually didn't imagine that there would be an uneven number of justices.
If Congress wanted to, it could by statute increase the number of Supreme Court justices or decrease the number, not by removing any, but by saying the next time there's a vacancy, it won't be filled.
Congress has the power to change the court, but for now, change faces long odds. Republicans, the justices themselves, even President Biden, are all opposed.
All of this depends on the idea that there would be a majority in Congress that would be in favor of such limitations. But if there is sufficient popular discontent with the Supreme Court, that should be possible.
But even if the House of Representatives were to pass such a bill, it's sure to be filibustered by Republicans in the Senate. There's no indication that Democrats have the votes change the rules of the filibuster. So from a practical perspective, there's not going to be an increase in the size of the Supreme Court for the foreseeable future.
Even if Congress does not ultimately change the size of the Supreme Court, a real threat to do so could have some impact on the court's willingness to continue issuing big, bold, and sometimes quite unpopular decisions.
June was a monumental moment for the Supreme Court, because of the decisions they made, but also as a sign of what could be to come.
One need only think about what are the dominant issues that conservatives care about in this country. At the end of October 2022, the court will hear about whether or not it should overrule precedents that allowed college universities to engage in affirmative action.
Under the logic of Justice Alito's opinion, we could easily see contraception and same-sex marriage being overturned.
The pace and boldness of this new conservative supermajority in just this last term lead me to believe that there is a lot more change in store.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.